Now let's move on to implement a basic ETL. Let me navigate to Visual Studio Code. I will create new controller ETL controller.java. Let's mark it with the REST controller annotation. Also a request mapping for the class. We'll name it AI ETL. We'll define a logger. We need two beans in this class. Let me import the chat model from this package. Now inject the beans through constructor. Now define a get mapping with name ingest. Also define a public method which returns response entity of map of string and object. This method takes a request parameter string of type string. We will name it URL. So basically what we are trying to do here, we will get an URL of an HTML page. We read that document, and when I say read, it is extraction. Then we enrich that data with summarization and keyword extraction. Then we will load into the vector store. As we are going to read the HTML page, let's have a try catch block. The first step, we'll read it. We'll say list of document. Let's name it chunk documents. And as we are going to reuse this read method, read and the extraction for other APIs as well, let's define a helper method to do this job, extract and chunk. Let's pass the URL, import the classes. This is Spring Framework AI document. Now let's ask it to create the method. Let's use URL resource class resource new URL resource. We'll pass the URL. Now once we created the URL resource, we have to pass it to the document reader. Reader new, we'll use Tika document reader and we pass the resource. As this throws exception, we will throw it to the calling method. Now we have to read reader.get. So we'll get the list of documents. Now we have read the documents. We have to chunk the documents. We'll also do this with the help of another method. We'll call chunk documents and we'll pass the document. Let's define the method. When we say chunk document, what we are going to do is split the document. We'll use token text splitter, token text splitter dot builder. Then we have to specify chunk size. I will give 350. I'll explain you why I'm giving this low. Also, I'll specify minimum chunk size characters 100 and then build. So this will do work of chunking. As we are using embedding model MXBAI embed large, this has a context size of 512 tokens. So that's the reason we are doing the chunk size 350. This is actual content chunk size. We also will have metadata. So that's why instead of specifying 512 or 500, I am doing it with the 350 tokens. If you use some other models, you can play around with this according to your model's token size. I have specified this with min chunk size characters. If the last remaining chunk is of size less than 100, then this will get added to the previous chunk. Now let's split the documents into chunks. Splitter dot split will pass documents. We'll extract it to a local variable. We'll name it chunk documents. Let me define a logger here to see how the documents are chunked and then return chunked documents. Now in the ETL, extraction is complete. Now let's move on to next step, that is transform. As we are going to reuse this as well in other APIs, I am going to define it in a separate method, enrich documents. I'll pass chunk documents here. Let's implement the method. Spring has implemented two types of enricher. One is summary metadata enricher, which takes the chat model and list of summary type. There are many options here. If you see current, next, previous. So when you specify current, you are instructing the enricher to only generate a summary of the chunk of the text that is currently being processed. When you specify summary type previous, it will look at the chunk of the text immediately before the current one and summarizes it and attach it to the current chunk's metadata as previous section summary. Similarly, summary type next, it will look at the chunk of the text immediately after the current one, summarizes it and attach it as next section summary. Let's add one more metadata enricher, keyword metadata enricher. We have to specify how many keyword we need. Let's create this constant and let's say we need 3. So now we have defined two enricher, summary metadata enricher and keyword metadata enricher. Now let's define a list of documents. Let's call it enriched documents. Let's look through all the documents batch wise. Let's define this constant. We'll make batch of size 5. So we'll create a sublist from the documents sublist I and mat minimum of batch size. Either it is batch size in case of the last batch size is less than the batch size, then we take the mat minimum. Let me define a try catch block and let me call summary enricher dot apply on this batch. List of documents, let's say it enriched batch. Now once we apply summary enricher, we'll apply keyword enricher on the enriched batch. We'll use same variable. We have created an array list here. Once it is enriched, we'll add enriched documents, add all enriched batch to it. Let me add a logger which logs batch size information. Also, let's catch the exception. When we are catching the exception, we'll log which batch is failed, and even if the enrichment is failed, we still add it to the enrichment docs because we don't want to lose the content. Let me add one more logger after the for loop finishes, which prints total enriched document size. Now let's return the enriched documents. We should return list of document instead of void. Let me assign it to a local variable enriched documents. Now we have done extraction and chunk and enrich. This is transformation, and now we have to load it to the Redis vector store. We'll also do it inside a method so that we can reuse it. We'll pass enriched documents. Let me create the method. Here also we'll do it in batches. We'll loop through all the documents, also define the vector size. Let's say batches of 5. We'll create a batch of 5 as we have done it in the enriched document also. We'll do mat minimum in case of last batch size is less than the defined batch size. Let's add this in the try catch block, Redis vector store, add, and then batch. In case of exception, what we will do is we'll try to add it in document wise. Let me add a log here in case of exception. We'll loop through each document in case of failed batch and we try to add it to the Redis vector store. If you get exception here, we have to discard it. We'll log it. Now ETL, all steps are completed. Let's define a response, import Java ETL. Here we are getting a sample metadata for first chunk to see how this response looks like, how the metadata looks like. Then return the response. As we are using the URL, we can get malformed URL exception. Also, if any other exception, we will send the error to the user. Let's build it. One more thing I forgot to mention, I have added these two dependencies here. If you remember, I have used Tika reader for reading from the URL. Now bring up the Postman and hit the ingest get API. Here URL I'm passing it this one. Let's navigate to the URL. So this is the URL we are going to extract chunk and load it to the Redis vector store. Let me hit the API, wait for the response. And let's look at the log as well. So if you can see here, splitting up the document into 13 chunks, there are 3 batches are running. The first 2 with 5 chunks, the next one is 3 chunks, total 13 chunks. Here we got the response. So this is the section summary the enricher has added, and if you remember, we have specified 3 keywords, right? So you can see it here: Spring, microservices, AI. If you specify 5, you will get 5 keywords here, and this is the summary enrichment. Now let's navigate to Redis store. Let me refresh the page. Do you see 13 documents, the each chunk how it got stored here? If you look at, we have section summary and keywords. Let's wrap this tutorial here. In the next tutorial, we will implement ingest in batch. That means we'll create an API which takes multiple URLs, loops through each URL and implement the same extract and chunk, enrich documents and load in batches. We'll see you there.